A game where even the boredom is by design. Okay, let's unpack this a bit. You sent us this review talking about Harold Halibut, right? A really unique adventure. It's got this incredibly detailed, handcrafted world, but here's the catch. Parts of it are apparently intentionally slow. Makes you wonder, is that slowdown like the whole point? The review definitely highlighted this contrast between the amazing craftsmanship and these moments of, let's say, very deliberate pacing.
It is a fascinating tension right from the start.
Yeah.
The whole idea that a game might actually aim for moments of boredom, it really makes you think differently about what we expect from, interactive entertainment.
Exactly. So for this deep dive, we're looking at a review from MSN. It came out April 15th, 2025. The reviewer put in about 12 hours playing Harold Halibut on an Xbox Series X, and they really got into what works, what's brilliant about it, but also this pretty bold decision to include what felt like, well, long stretches of kind of mundane gameplay.
12 hours is a decent chunk of time, enough to really get a feel for the nuances, especially in a game like this, and the fact they flagged the intentionality of the boredom. That's key. It suggests it's not just, bad pacing. It's maybe a conscious creative choice.
Right. So our mission for this deep dive anyway is to try and figure out why a game would deliberately choose to be, well, less engaging sometimes. We want to understand how that plays into the whole experience and, ultimately, does it actually work for the player? We'll explore the setting, the characters you meet, and really try to get inside the reviewer's journey with this very intriguing title. So a game that's literally handcrafted. I mean, where do we even begin?
Well, I think we absolutely have to start by painting a picture of the world, the basic setup. Harold Halibut happens on this spaceship, the Fedora 1. Now, it crash-landed ages ago, and it's actually submerged, sitting at the bottom of an alien ocean. And over time, this whole community has kind of grown up inside this underwater vessel.
Wow. Okay, talk about a life aquatic. Living inside a crashed spaceship, underwater, on another planet. That's a premise with some built-in intrigue right there. And our main guy in this watery world is Harold Halibut. What's his deal?
Harold, yeah. He's a young research assistant. And from the review, it sounds like a lot of his time is spent doing pretty routine stuff for a scientist.
Mm-hmm.
Think of him as maybe not the most, let's say, dynamic person there, at least not at first.
So he's kind of the guy who gets asked to grab the, I don't know, space kelp coffee. That sounds, well, a bit like normal life, actually. But the review mentioned a turning point for Harold. What shakes things up?
That's right. Yeah, the reviewer points to this specific encounter Harold has, and it sets him off on this path that could change his own fate and maybe the fate of everyone living in the Fedora 1. That's the narrative hook that pulls you through those early parts.
Okay. And gameplay-wise, what are we looking at when you actually play Harold Halibut? The review calls it an adventure game, which, can mean a lot of things.
It can, yeah. But what really makes this game stand out, and something the reviewer clearly loved, is the visual style. The whole world, every character, every object was made using actual physical handcrafted models.
Yeah.
Then they scanned them meticulously, animated them. It gives the game this really distinct stop-motion animation look. Think like classic Wallace and Gromit or maybe early Tim Burton stuff. It gives it this tactile, slightly jerky, but incredibly detailed feel.
That sounds unbelievably time-consuming, but also potentially just stunning to look at. So even if Harold's just delivering, I don't know, underwater memos, at least he's doing it in a world that looks like a miniature masterpiece.
Exactly. And that dedication to the handcrafted look, that feeds directly into the things the reviewer really praised about the game.
Okay, so putting aside the potential for errand-running overload for a minute, what did the reviewer genuinely like? What clicked?
Oh, quite a few things, actually. They were really struck by how the story is delivered. Right from the start, the narrative, the world building, it's all presented very carefully, very clearly. The reviewer said they felt like they really got the world and the characters within the first, 30 minutes, even coming in totally cold.
That's so important for drawing you in, right? Especially if you're about to hit the player with a gameplay style that might test their patience. If you're not invested in the world and the people, those slow bits could really, really drag.
Precisely. And it sounds like the game does a great job building that investment. The reviewer specifically praised the detailed way the characters' emotions shift and how they grow through the story. Mm-hmm. They also mentioned the full voice acting, which they said was impressive, really brings these, handcrafted figures to life.
Good voice acting makes such a difference, doesn't it? Sounds like Harold Halibut really nailed that part. And what about Harold himself? Our protagonist navigating this undersea world.
Harold was highlighted as a really compelling character. The reviewer felt his internal struggles, his personal journey, his growth, it was all conveyed really effectively. It suggests that even when he's doing these seemingly mundane things, there's a deeper, engaging story happening within him.
So you get invested in this seemingly ordinary guy in this really extraordinary place. Okay. What else did the reviewer praise?
The relationships between the characters was another strong point. The dialogue is apparently well written, really shows how connections change, deepen over time. The reviewer actually recommended doing the side objectives because the characters you meet are so interesting. They even mentioned having a personal favorite, a character named Chris.
Always a good sign when specific characters stick with a reviewer like that. Means the writing's working. And we can't forget those visuals, right? The unique, handcrafted style.
Absolutely not. The reviewer just raves about the visual quality, that unique stop-motion look. They mentioned the meticulous detail in everything, the props, character expressions, even how they move. Apparently, Harold keeps an in-game diary with sketches. That adds another layer, another perspective on the world. It's clear just a massive amount of artistry went into how it looks.
It really sounds like a labor of love on the visual front. And, for a game with such a distinct style, probably a lot of dialogue, localization is key, especially for, say, the Japanese market. How did the subtitles hold up?
Very impressed, apparently. The reviewer noted that for a game with this much text, getting the localization right is often tough. But Harold Halibut seems to have delivered high-quality Japanese subtitles. Very few errors, felt natural.
That's a big plus. Shows real attention to detail across the board. And finally, the ending. We all know how important a satisfying conclusion is. What did the reviewer think about how Harold Halibut wraps up?
They found the single ending really satisfying. Felt appropriate, gave a convincing conclusion that tied back to the game's title and themes. It sounds like the whole narrative arc, even with those slower parts, ultimately delivers a meaningful payoff.
Okay, so we've got this visually stunning, meticulously crafted world, compelling characters, satisfying story. So why this undercurrent of designed boredom? This is where it gets really interesting, right?
It really does, because the reviewer, they don't pull any punches on the main criticism. The gameplay itself, described as very tedious, especially those first 3 hours or so. They actually said it was one of the most boring gaming experiences they'd had in the past year. Mainly just fetch quests, not much story progression happening.
Ouch. Yeah, that's pretty direct. So what's the rationale? Why would developers intentionally make gameplay feel, well, boring?
This is where the reviewer offers a really interesting take. They suggest this boredom is deliberate. It's meant to reflect Harold's position, his sort of emotional state. It's designed to put you right there in his shoes, experiencing the monotony of his routine.
That's a bold artistic choice. So you're feeling Harold's day-to-day grind right along with him, almost using the player's own potential frustration as a tool to connect with the character. That's an interesting angle.
It is. And the argument is, this deliberate pacing sets the stage for later. As the story unfolds, as you understand more, those same environments, those same kinds of tasks, they start to feel different. Your perspective shifts, even if the core loop hasn't changed drastically.
So the mundane gains meaning through the narrative.
Okay.
What about the environments themselves? You mentioned the reviewer said you revisit places a lot. Did that add to the tedious feeling?
It seems like it did, yeah. While the world's detailed, going back to the same areas over and over does create familiarity, maybe even over-familiarity. That can definitely amplify any feeling of repetition in the gameplay itself. Although the reviewer does note that more locations open up in the second half, which helps mix things up a bit.
Makes sense. A change of scenery often helps. Now, for anyone thinking about replaying it, the reviewer mentioned replayability. What was the verdict there?
Yeah. Unfortunately, there's no option to skip cutscenes. You can fast forward dialogue, but not skip the scenes themselves. That apparently makes repeat playthroughs less appealing. If you just want to hit the story beats again without the slow parts or scenes you've already watched, that could be frustrating.
That's a fair point. Sometimes you just want the highlights the second time around. Did the reviewer run into any technical problems? Glitches? Crashes?
Couple of minor things. They mentioned some occasional stuttering during loading, especially with Xbox Quick Resume, and that did lead to the game crashing a couple of times. But they were quick to add that the autosave is really frequent. So thankfully, not much progress was lost, which minimized the frustration.
Okay, so a few technical hiccups, but sounds like nothing game-breaking, especially with good autosaves. So pulling it all together then, what's the reviewer's final takeaway on Harold Halibut? Considering this tension between the great story and the intentionally slow gameplay.
Well, they're pretty clear. The narrative, the world building, exceptionally strong. But, and it's a big but, they stress that players should go in fully expecting a significant chunk of gameplay that they'll probably find tedious. The key, they argue, is accepting this as a deliberate design choice.
So it's a game that kind of asks for certain mindset, a
Yeah.
willingness to embrace the slow burn and trust it's going somewhere. The reviewer even gave a specific tip, didn't they?
They did, yeah. They suggested pushing through until you get to a task involving cleaning filters. Apparently, that's around the start of Chapter 3. They felt the game becomes significantly more engaging right around that point. It's almost like you have to pass this initial test of patience to really unlock the core experience.
Huh. That's a very specific landmark, and it sounds like maybe that initial hurdle is pretty significant based on some player data the reviewer mentioned.
Yes, exactly. They looked at the Xbox achievement data, found quite a big drop-off between players finishing Chapter 1, that was about 18%, and those finishing the whole game, which is only 9%. It strongly suggests that while a decent number start, quite a few don't make it through that initial slower phase. However, the fact that nearly half of those who do finish Chapter 1 actually go on to finish the entire game, that implies that if you stick with it, if it clicks, it becomes quite rewarding.
So it's a game that might filter players pretty heavily early on. Not for everyone, maybe, but for those who connect with its unique rhythm and that amazing world, there's likely something really worthwhile there. What's the final word from the Edger review then?
Despite that challenging slow start, the reviewer ultimately concludes that Harold Halibut offers a level of craftsmanship, a unique artistic vision that you just don't see very often in indie games these days.
Oh.
It's a real testament to the developers sticking to their singular vision, even if that vision included, moments of quiet.
Right, that deliberately designed boredom. Okay, so to kind of wrap up our deep dive on this Harold Halibut review, we've seen a game that's a really fascinating case study in design, haven't we? It's a world where moments of slowness aren't necessarily flaws, but might actually be part of the point contributing to the story, to your connection with Harold. The incredible handcrafted world, the compelling characters, those are huge strengths. But that slow initial pace, definitely something you need to be aware of, maybe even ready to embrace.
Absolutely. And thinking about your interest, in getting knowledge quickly but thoroughly, this deep dive really shows how even things that seem negative on the surface, like boredom in a game, can be integral to the overall message, the impact. It really encourages you to think about the why behind creative choices, not just the what. Sometimes understanding that intention, even if the experience itself feels a bit tedious at first, can unlock a much deeper appreciation.
That's a really insightful way to put it. It makes you think about how much we chase constant stimulation. And maybe there is value in those quieter moments, even if they feel a little Halibut-esque sometimes. So here's a final thought for you to maybe mull over. If art, like this game, can intentionally use monotony to make us appreciate change and connection more, what other seemingly negative experiences in our own lives might hold some hidden value? Is there maybe a boredom by design in our own routines that ultimately shapes how we see things in important ways? Something to consider until our next deep dive.